All right.
Cool.
So I'm going to open my cherry Coke to get caffeinated. Hi, I'm Evan, head of engineering from Arcade.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm an engineer from Airbyte.
And we are here to talk about what AI means in the modern data stack. And I think modern is now too old of a term, and maybe we need a new term. Is it the postmodern data stack? Is it the AI data stack?
I think it's the AI data stack now, yes.
Okay, and so I think this is a good group of people to talk because Airbyte is amazing at the beginning of the data stack, the ELT process, and Arcade is amazing at the end of the data stack for doing visualizations, taking actions. There's all sorts of stuff in the middle, your actual database, your warehouses, your icebergs, your DBTs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, what have you been seeing, Alex? What are you seeing with your customers that they want to do with AI that's new?
There's a wide range of use cases. I think the most interesting ones is that people are not building data pipelines for their own data, but they're building massive data pipelines for building applications that will service their actual customers. And this opens up a whole can of worms with regards to everything related to security, privacy, who can access the data when, at what time. And I don't think that's necessarily a new use case, but it's just one that is becoming a lot more prominent. So I'm seeing a lot more people talking about it, thinking about it, making mistakes around it. So I think that's like part of the really interesting like new development.
When you say these use cases, usually in the olden days of 5 years ago, the end of a data pipeline was visualization reports, Tableau, Looker, things like that. And then 3 or 4 years ago, reverse ETL showed up. And now people are using the data in their warehouse to go back to the original systems to update Salesforce, send some emails, whatever that means. What is it now?
I think now, as is August 2nd, it's a lot of insights extractions. That being said, everyone calls this the very first step or the stepping stone as they're building their applications. Everyone wants to go into taking actions and activating on their data. What I'm seeing is that it's a slower process than what was anticipated just even a few months ago. That being said, we are definitely moving away from the typical just having a dashboard and having a human analyze. So I think 5 years ago, yes, dashboards with a human analyzing the data. Now we're having AI analyze the data, and in the near future, I would expect there's going to be a lot more of an AI taking an action on the behalf of their users.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's 2 flavors of AI tool that are being made against warehouses. There's and we talked about this on our blog post. So we have the type of tool where you analyze and exploit your data. And that's meant to like keep a human in the loop, but you're like, tell me about the sales yesterday, or figure out if there's a correlation between table A or event A and something else. But you're still like doing the act of analysis. But what's new is that like maybe you're not an analyst, maybe you don't even have SQL, but you can still explore your data in a better way. That's tool type number 1, and then tool type number 2 is the operational stuff. Like I really do want you to read exactly this query and put it in a spreadsheet for me, or I really want you to update this data. We have a lot of companies that are like big enterprises, and a very common type of tool is that they're going to have a update user account tool that they've made at a central place, and it does like all the right audit things, all the right permission checks, and they have to update like 3 systems in parallel because big enterprise. They make like a common MCP server for that, and then all of the sub departments can use it, like support can use it, sales can use it. But then they're going to be updating like the operational database, they're going to be updating the warehouse, they're going to be updating Salesforce all at once. And there's a really strong bifurcation about those are both database tools. They're both writing SQL, but they're managed quite differently.
Yes, they're managed differently. I would say for a pretty good reason. I think that the risk factor is very different. When you're operating more as a co-pilot and a human is always in the loop, making sure that all of the actions are reasonable, it's a lot less scary to have the AI just run some select statements. But when you automate the whole flow, then it becomes a lot scarier and you want to have the proper safety nets.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious, for the analyst type of use case, do you find that the agents are operating as a human, like they're co-pilots, so they're like operating on behalf of me or along with me? Or are they doing stuff on their own kind of in the background?
There's going to be a mix of both. But in addition to just helping you run the queries that you want to do, there's going to be some pre-processing that can be done behind the scene. As part of your data pipeline, you're going to be ingesting your data, and then in the world of 5 years ago, you would have applied some transformations just to make it easier to be processed. But now you can do more than just simple maps. You can actually summarize the data or enhance it or combine it with some other data sets that are not necessarily super easy to join with. And that can be done super easily with AI. So the answer here is both.
When you think about the both, how does it compare to what would have been called reverse ETL a year ago? Is it the types of actions that are, when they're happening, like that still? Like you're updating a system of record, or is it something new emerging?
That's a good question. I think that there's sort of two types of reverse ETL. When you say updating a set of records, I think we'll still see a lot of those. But what agentic workflows enable you to do is it makes it a lot easier to just create flows that might just need to update records in an ad hoc fashion. So here you might not systematically want to update all of your Salesforce record. You might just be interacting with your chatbot, asking some questions maybe about like the transcript of that was related to an opportunity, and then want to update a note. So there's going to be a lot more ad hoc operations that will be done, as opposed to just everyday update all of the labels on your Salesforce customers. And I don't think that those workflows were impossible to do beforehand. They're just a lot easier to do now.
Yeah. I think the main thing is about empowerment, frankly. Like you said, all of this was possible before, but it required a technical person with a knowledge of SQL. And then you had to deploy the reverse ETL tool or something like it. And now anybody in the business can just be like, hey, robot, do this thing for me. And we'll figure out how to do it. You just need a basic orchestration platform.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like it just removes a barrier of entry to be able to run those types of flows. There was a time when you needed a full team of data engineers to be able to pull the data and create the reports that a non-technical person needed. Now they can just ask an AI to do it, and they're going to get the data they want right away.
Yeah. So let's talk about like guardrails now. If AI's promise is that anyone can do anything easily on their own, or most things, the guardrails probably matter more, especially when letting you write to my database or write to Salesforce or something. One of the things that we find at Arcade is that we usually want the agent to have the same permissions as the end user. So maybe there's one agent called update customer records, dealing with customer records, but like my permissions are much less than yours. So if I try to delete somebody, I'll get an error, but you, the head of security or the head of customer support, can. So we spend a lot of time integrating with like really tight OAuth solutions and really tight permission models so that the same tools will like work appropriately based on who's using them. Have you found that people do that properly or no? You mentioned some people are making mistakes. Tell me more about that.
So it's not so much that people don't do it properly, but people don't think about it when they're first building their own application. So what I'm saying is that a lot of applications will be built with the assumptions that it is single tenant. And I understand how they get into this situation. It's a somewhat difficult problem to solve. It's not core to their value proposition to support multiple users. They want to ship fast, but then they'll realize that they need to go back and update like a whole lot of their infrastructure to be able to support multi-tenancy. And I think the mistake here is that it's actually not that difficult to do right from the beginning. Postgres has solutions to enforce row protection at the user level. I'm less familiar with other databases, but I'm sure that they all have something similar. So yeah, like what I've found is that, and that's actually what we do for our own services. We just enabled row level like security access, and we just never have to worry about it afterwards when we're building the applications on top of it. So here I think the mistake would just be that if people don't think about it from the get-go, they need to go back and do it, and it's a lot harder to do it as an afterthought because they have made a lot of architectural decisions that were based on false promises essentially.
Do you find that the database's permission model is the right one? We have some customers who are like, yeah, I want to decide who can use this AI tool, but I don't want the database to be holding that off information. I want my entitlement server to be doing that, or I want to check it up in Zendesk, like what kind of role you have and stuff like that.
This is such an old question about, do you have your business logic to live in your database or not? I think that it's just a lot easier to get right if you can put it very close to your database. But the cost here is that you lose a lot of flexibility. Like you mentioned, like you might want to enable things like feature flagging or having multiple like levels of permissions based on the types of customers, and it's a lot more difficult to evolve if it's directly tied to the database. That being said, it's a lot easier to get wrong, and like the mistakes here, the cost of a mistake here, I think is very high. It's a trade-off. I don't think it's a trade-off that is proper to just security, but when it comes to security, I personally tend to lean a little bit more towards safety nets than extensibility for the sake of extensibility.
Same.
I don't know. I just find those mistakes very scary. I do not want to be responsible for the next massive data leak, especially when it comes to like customer data. That is, it's just scary.
I think that's even more true with the AI stuff, frankly. If you're in the forefront of this field and you're trying out automating your workflows and you're trying out giving your entire business like access to these agents and models, security matters more because you don't know what they're going to do.
Yep,
and so you have to be sure that they only have read-only permissions on the database. You have to make sure that the roles the end users have are like only the tables are allowed to see. Invest in that now before you get yourself in trouble.
Maybe that's a good way to think about it. As the field gains in maturity and we gain more confidence into like, what may or may not actually happen in practice, and not just what we think the AI models will do, then maybe we can build more like another security layer on top of the database that is maybe more flexible. Yeah, the how to do it right is like a bit of an open question for me right now.
Yeah, there's a mental model I really like in architecture for this, which is your agent is an application. And just like a traditional application, like the application has a database connection that is limiting to what it can do. It's read-only, it has certain tables, whatever it is. But then there's a user layer. And so just like in any application, like I can't see your docs and you can't see my docs. And there's a permission enforcement layer in the tools, in the AI application, in the orchestrator somewhere that is being like, okay, like, yes, the application can read every table, but Alex can't, Evan can't. And at least the way that we're thinking about it is the LLM is the worst place for that enforcement because it can be tricked, hallucinated, all that other stuff. And the tool calling boundary is the best place to enforce that. Because once the ALM decides to call a tool, that's when you start checking, who is this user? Can they do this thing? Throw errors if you can't. If there's anything I want people to take away from this chat, it's that message. Do not enforce security at the LLM. Do it with tools.
Oh, yeah, I think of the LLM as the user because it is performing an action on the user. So you don't want the LLM to enforce its own security permissions in the same way that you wouldn't ask the user to decide what they are allowed.
Who polices the police?
Yeah, exactly. And in this way, the LLM can try or it can even hallucinate whatever it wants. Your data is always going to be protected. Yeah, I definitely would not want to just add security rules in my prompt because I don't understand how the prompts are or are not respected. Like sometimes adding exclamation marks or emojis help the model respect the rules better, but it's not predictable enough for it to be an actual security rule.
We agree. Okay. Yes, if you take anything from this talk, is that you need to enforce your security model not in the LLM, somewhere else. Excellent. You said you've seen people do things wrong. What's the most wrong thing you've seen? What was the most wrong implementation?
One of the hardest problems is around Airbyte lives at the start of the postmodern AI data stack, where we're doing a lot of data ingestion. One of the most difficult problems for AI application developers is building the context that is necessary for their agents to perform the actions that they need. Very often, people will try to load too much data. People will try to load too little data, and it's very difficult to identify what is needed. One big problem that I'm seeing from my end of things is that people will try to rebuild their own pipeline when they decide to change what gets loaded, as opposed to staging the data in a pre-staging world where they can then just pick and choose what they want without having to re-pull the data from the third-party APIs. This results in like very high costs, slowness, and it just slows down their iteration quite a lot. Yeah, so that's a problem that I guess I feel more strongly about it because it's very related to what Airbyte does. Again, it's not unique to AI, but the problem just becomes a lot more important because people will iterate even more about their definition of what piece of data is valuable for them.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, when you want to act, you're like, okay, I have all my data here. I've analyzed it. And then you want to take an action on it. We find that it is best to read that data fresh and just to make sure it hasn't changed.
Yep.
And then take your action. You're like, I've analyzed all my sales for the month and we need to buy more t-shirts. Okay, the data warehouse has predicted we're going to run out of t-shirts. Let me query the production database just to make sure that no one's ordered more t-shirts in the past couple of hours between the last ETL sync. Nope, we're still running out of t-shirts. Cool, I'll place the order. So there's a really kind of blend between the historical data in the warehouse and the fresh data in the source of record. And you probably need to check both before you do something, especially in an automated way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then would you say that people mostly use their historical data to decide on what action to make, and then they'll look at the fresh data to confirm that their decision is still up to date with the reality?
Exactly. There's in general, there's usually a plan execute distinction. And like you see this in Cursor, you see this in Claude Code, and that pattern's really effective around the LLM to like basically make a checklist of what it wants to do. And then so it like doesn't get off track and stays on the checklist. You could envision this kind of the same way. Like the warehouse is the data for the planning step. And then the operational system is guardrails for the execute step. You're like, okay, I need to buy more medium t-shirts. The warehouse told me so. Great. I see the operational database like has a pending shipment for more t-shirts. Error. I don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah, let's change the plan. Yeah, exactly. This makes sense. Yeah, I like the Cursor analogy, which makes sense because it is also an AI application, but it's just very concrete that there's a two-step to all the AI workflows or actions.
Yeah, there's a beautiful dream that like a lot of these marketing systems have where you're like, okay, the warehouse is telling me Alex is about to churn. I do some machine learning and I'm like, okay, he hasn't bought a product in a while. He's now in the at-risk cohort. I should probably send him a coupon for $20 off so he comes back to my business. But before I do that, and because my agent is allowed to talk to my MailChimp to send you the coupon code, it's allowed to talk to the production database and generate the coupon code. It's allowed to do all those things. But like, I should do one more check just to make sure. Have you bought anything today? Just to be sure?
Yeah. This makes sense. This is just super reasonable. Yeah, like you wouldn't buy t-shirts just because you had a note from 2 months ago that you needed to buy a t-shirt. You would see if you still needed it.
Yep. I'm really curious. You said something at the beginning, which is you found your customers are now building multi-tenant data systems. What does that mean for the AI implications of them? Describe the architecture. What's going on here?
Yeah, of course. So just like with any application, you'll, of course, need to load your data in. You'll have some sort of like interface with the AI. The main difference with multi-tenancies is that the data that they can have access to will depend on which users they are taking actions on behalf of. So this comes down to what we were saying a little bit earlier, where you don't want a fixed set of rules. You want a set of rules that depends on the user that the LLM is taking actions of. This can live like in two places. Either you have an application layer that will process the request and decide whether or not what data can be accessed or whether the action can be taken. Or you can also push it down to the database, which offer what I would consider to be stronger security guarantees at the cost of, I would describe it as less flexibility. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think about the multi-tenancy kind of at two layers. There's like the database roles you're talking about. I can see this table, you can't, or I can see this row, or you can't. There's the database enforced like permissions. And then there's this other layer that's like my end user who's using this connection that has certain permissions might have even less permissions. Like just because the agent's database connection, SQL connection string, has access to it doesn't mean the end user does. And that's where multi-tenancy gets even weirder.
Yes. So like when accessing the database, like the way that I think about it, there's essentially two types of like database connections. There's the admin ones that maybe the application behind the scene will be using for all of its operations. But the one that's still actually exposed is going to be heavily restricted, essentially just based on the user that it's through.
Yeah. One of the things that I like a lot about Arcade very specifically is that you write the same tool, Python code for your tool logic, but then every time it's run, you get a context variable. We call it tool context. You'll learn who the user is. They might have different secrets. So you might like get a different database connection string, even like yours or mine will be different. And so the tool itself can only be written once, but then depending on who's calling it, and you'll know that, oh, error, you can't access that, or error, your scopes are not valid for that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. Like the security layer should be below if you think about the tool as the interface between your application and the user, the security level should be lower so that you don't need to build the same tool for an admin, for someone who has read access, and for someone who has read access. That can all be handled like behind the scenes, and you would just return the data that the user should have access to.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, let's leave the security topic and go to somewhere spicier, which is, do you think AI tools are supplanting what visualization tools used to be used for?
Kind of, in the sense that visualization tools are tools to help a human understand insights about their business, but they require some, like I would call it training to be able to process them. They're not always super obvious. Whereas if you're able to chat directly with the data itself or with someone that has pre-processed some of the insights, it becomes a lot easier. So I think that I don't necessarily think that dashboards are disappearing. They did just certainly serve their purpose, but yeah, I would think as a chatbot as just another interface for better understanding the state of your business, which has a lower barrier of entry, let's say, than a lot of those dashboards. Does it mean that everything that they'll all disappear? I don't know, not necessarily. One good thing about dashboards is that it's sometimes easy to have a bird's eye view of a whole lot of information. Like it is very dense in information at the cost of not always being super easy to parse.
Have you come up with, I phrase this kind of as a choice, like dashboards or chatting. Have you come across any like new interfaces or new products that are something in between?
Yeah, I've worked with a company that helps developer prioritize issues and tickets based on like customer demands. While you might want, for example, tables or list or dashboard that shows which companies provide the most ARR or value to your business. It's sometimes just a lot easier to chat and interact. And I find it a lot easier to use the dashboard as a first view and then chat with the chatbot to actually get the full insights that you might be interested in.
That's interesting.
So what I like about the dashboard is that it's very dense in information. So it gives you good pointers about what to dig into. But then the actual digging, I personally find difficult with dashboards. So it's nice to have a natural language interface.
So the hot take is very smart engineer who works at ETL company doesn't want to write SQL anymore. That's the hot take.
Yeah, that is not surprising. And that was one of the very first use case that I've had for ChatGPT. First thing I did was stop writing SQL queries anymore. It's too tedious, and it's a solved problem essentially.
I love how you're doing the reverse. Like all of these BI tools are like, we're really good at AI text to SQL, and you're going the other way around. You want the AI to give you SQL so you can paste it into the code base and you have to worry about it.
Yeah, it's because I have a different persona from the typical data analyst. I'm on the engineering side, so I guess in a sense I need to interact more with the code itself than with the dashboard.
Yeah,
but
makes sense.
AI is useful for both.
All right, let's talk about the AI tools like themselves. What are people making? What kind of AI apps and tools and features have you seen? And I can tell you about what we're seeing.
There's like people are trying to essentially reinvent everything. Some of the cool ones that struck to me were everything around monitoring and even going all the way to like fixing up issues is something that I find super interesting, super like risky in the sense that it's all going to be about the execution. But if you're able to automatically revert the PR because an anomaly was automatically detected, that can allow engineers to sleep better at night and to be fresh and more productive. So I find like what's going on in the space of like helpers for tedious in software engineering tasks interesting, but still I think it still needs to be proven in terms of like how this will actually work, but it's a good space. In terms of I think that's the big one that like really struck to me recently.
Nice. One of the things that I've seen in the last couple of weeks there really is coding agents are pretty good. Cursor's pretty good. Claude's pretty good.
Yep.
What I really like is when people start adding non-code context automatically into those things. Okay. And so there's like really good MCP servers to read docs now. And there's really good MCP servers to like understand Swagger APIs and that kind of stuff. And so if you're like, hey, like I want to make an integration that integrates with this thing. By the way, the docs are here. By the way, the template for building projects is here. And by the way, here's our own docs about how we like to do it. You can really build a workflow in the LLM. Okay, step 1, the docs. Step 2, read the template. Step 3. And you can encode your best practices. That stuff's becoming pretty powerful these days, which is also really nice.
That makes sense. I think it's the natural evolution. It makes sense that all of the AI tools started with software engineering or coding because coding is just text that is very well structured. And it's also targeting users that are more comfortable being on the bleeding edge side. But then as the tools become more sophisticated, it only makes sense that they're also able to better support more like unstructured data or very unstructured data. Yeah.
And the reward functions are really clear. What's the reward function? We'll keep running PyTest until it stops failing.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, that's true. The validation is also, it's a lot easier than whether or not this piece of documentation is still.
Yeah. What about in the data space? What sort of cool tools are you seeing people build on top of warehouses?
Right now, I think that the big problems that I've seen people try to solve is answering the question of whether there is a generic way to build an AI context, which it essentially means, is there a way to build an AI search engine? I
That's anything
personally
so.
think purposely think so. Yes, exactly. I suspect it is possible. I think it's still very difficult because context is so application dependent that identifying which piece of information to ingest or to value more than others is very difficult, and it's going to depend very much on each application. That being said, I think that whoever is able to solve that problem is going to become very rich because it's going to simplify a lot of the work that needs to be done to actually power all of those applications. Because like at the end of the day, all AI engineering is just like building the proper context for the LLM.
Yeah. We even see that with tool selection, frankly.
Mhm.
Even describing the tools that the agent has access to is a type of context.
Yeah, of course.
You have to describe them, you have to describe the inputs and outputs. You have to
Yep.
describe the like when you would use this tool and not some other tool. And if you give the agent too many tools, it gets confused. If
It's
you
too
give the
much.
agent
Yeah.
not enough tools, it's not very useful. And so there's so many patterns. So do you have sub agents? Okay, you're the Gmail one, you're the Outlook one, and then the
Yeah.
parent agent knows who to call at the right moment. We're actually investigating some pretty cool stuff about automatic tool selection and tool evaluation at runtime, so it picks the right ones at the right moment. There's all sorts of cool stuff there too, which is not only is there the context for what you're talking about, there's the context about what you want to do with it. So it's 2 layers of context
Yep.
building problems.
Yep. Exactly.
That's what keeps us up at night, frankly. That and security.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. And you also mentioned something super interesting. The need to evaluate the results at runtime is also super important because it turns out the models also change behind the scene. So what worked yesterday might not work anymore today, even though you haven't changed any of your prompting or anything. So you constantly need to reevaluate and tweak your flow. So the more you're able to automate that part, the more you'll be able to actually focus on more interesting pieces of the problem.
Yeah, one of the things that really blew my mind when I joined Arcade is that there's a third level. Let me see if I can say this right. There's a third step in the testing pyramid that all AI tools need that you didn't need before. So you had your unit tests, you had your integration tests, and now you need model evaluation tests. So
Yep.
the Arcade platform lets you build that pretty nicely. So you're like, all right, I have an integration with Gmail. I have an integration test that proves you can send the email. I have the unit test that validates the inputs and makes sure that it's a valid email that you have to give it. But then you have to do the model test where you're like, okay, here's a list of all the different ways I can say, send Alex a Gmail, send Alex an email, reply to Alex, tell Alex something. And all of those with high confidence should end up calling the tool Gmail send email with
the right
Alex's
parameters, yes.
parameters, the inbox and this message. And so
Yep.
we actually build those up for all of our tools, which is wild. Then you run them against Anthropic, you run them against OpenAI, you run them against Grok, you run them against DeepSeek now. And it's really wild to see this as part of the test suite because you have to do it. It's the only way you know that the LLM will choose your tool properly. And you've already proven that the tool will work once it is chosen. You have to actually make sure it will be chosen, which is amazing.
Correct. Again, here there's 2 layers. Does the tool do the right thing? And does the LLM, which is essentially just another external dependency to your system, will also behave properly with it? But yeah, there's no way around constantly testing. You can't just mock or assume that it's going to behave the way you want it to because it's not deterministic.
Yep. GPT-5 rolls out and suddenly it doesn't work the same way as it did before, and you got to make some changes. That's how it is.
Yep, that's how it is, and that's how it's going to keep on being, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't see things stabilizing so much.
All right. What else should we talk about?
Have you seen any interesting or surprising mistakes people make while building AI agents?
So many.
What do you have an example of one that is either tricky or so common that everyone should be aware of it?
Yeah, there's a couple of buckets. The first one is about security. And we talked a little bit about per user permissions and per user roles, but even lower down, make absolutely sure that anything that is secret, like an environment variable API key or an OAuth token, never ever goes to an LLM. 1, the user can trick it to leak it. 2, it might be training on it, somebody else's chat window. Whatever you do, make sure that the secret thing the tool needs to actually hit the API or whatever it is never ever goes to the LLM. It's a separate process. It's an environment variable that only that other process can get to. All the LLM knows is that there is a tool called send email, doesn't know how to actually send an email. That's incredibly important. People mess that up all the time.
Yeah.
People chatting with their agent and they're like, hey, do you happen to know a Google OAuth key? It's like, sure, here's one. And it's like, don't do that.
Yeah, I think this goes back to treating the LLM as your user. You would not tell your user about your production keys, so you should not tell the LLM about them either. Like the tool is a very clear interface about what should go in or out, and nothing else should ever leak.
Yep. And then the other thing that's really interesting too is that LLMs want intentionality in their tools. They don't want resources. If you have a bunch of REST API endpoints that you've turned into tools that you've given the LLM, that's going to confuse it. What it really wants to do is have an intention that a tool captures a bunch of API calls or a bunch of different resource management. So the canonical example we always talk about is replying to an email. So we have a Gmail tool called reply to email. But to actually reply to an email the way people want with intention, okay, reply to Alex, say I'm going to be 5 minutes late to the video call. That's what I want the LLM to do. And the LLM can understand that, okay, that involves email, that involves talking to Alex. I have a tool about that, go figure it out. But inside of the tool, I'm going to search for Gmails. I'm going to find all my Alexes. I'm going to guess it's you because we had a recent email through. I'm going to craft a reply and I'm going to send a reply. That's 5 API calls. The LLM would have messed something up if it was doing all of that itself. It would have hallucinated something or it would have had an error along the way. So you want to put all of that deterministic workflow, search, rank, get the top email, send the thing, into a tool that's traditional programming that you can unit test. And you can, if one of the steps fails, you can go back and try again, try a catch or something. That's not something the LLM should do. The LLM should do, like, I have chosen the intention. I know this intention needs like a subject, a body, and an email address, but that's it. The tool should handle everything else.
Yeah, I agree. And like I think REST APIs are based on resources and not like intentions because they're not actually interacting with a user. They're just tools for people to build applications. But if you think about as your tool as like the actual product or like the interface that will actually provide value, it needs to be one layer above so that the user, which is the LLM, can actually do everything it takes. Like you wouldn't ask a user to use all the REST APIs to figure out how much balance there is still in their account. You would just tell them right away. And maybe this would involve multiple calls behind the scene to produce the number, but like you don't want the end user to have to worry about all of that.
I really like this think of the LLM as the user thing. I think that's a really good metaphor.
It's just that if the tool is the boundary of your application, you just need to think about who is interacting with it. Today it's an LLM, but it could also be a user if they wanted to figure out how to make an MCP call directly, but I would not recommend that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about machine experience design at Arcade, which is a lot like user experience design. What does the machine need? What does the LLM need to do what it has accomplished a job? What interfaces does it like? What retry logic does it like?
So then do you think about this sort of like eval test suite where you test how the LLMs interact with your tools as the equivalent of your UX testing, basically, which you can automate because it's machines?
Exactly. Very much. Yeah. It's very funny, actually. There's a great example in our Slack toolkit right now. So Slack can take markdown messages or plain text messages as an input. The API field is called like MKDWN or something, like short for markdown.
Sure.
And so like, all right, me as a human, I understand that, I guess. I can send text or I can send markdown. Cool. The tool we make for the LLMs, we have to expand that to like markdown content for the message is what we've changed the argument to, just so the LLM will, with a higher confidence, know what to call it. That's a really small example, but it's like little stuff like that adds up to make it so the tools are actually effective.
Yeah, this makes sense. I think that like maybe spicy, most REST APIs are not super well designed. They just evolve because there's a feature request or a bug fix that needs to get in. But attention to detail matters a lot here because you can't just tell the user, hey, I know this is weird, but this is how you would actually interact with it. And you can just jump on a call. It needs to be obvious, ideally on the first attempt from the LLM, that this is the right parameter to be used. So I think that interfaces or the design of your interfaces matter even more than for REST APIs.
Yeah, and we think a lot about that too in like even how errors are handled. So like we have a type of error that we can throw from our tools called retriable error, retriable tool error. Yeah. And yeah, it has the error message, it has the stack trace, this normal stuff, but it also has additional context for LLM. And so if you're running a multi-turn agent, whatever that error message is will be loaded back into the contents. So it would be like you said, reply to email 123. The retriable error would come back like, actually, email 123 isn't an email. Like we couldn't find it. Did you mean 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like when we reply with additional like options for the LLM or something, it needs to automatically on its second turn, its second attempt, like not fail. Not every error is appropriate for that, but like this notion that the tool is the right place to load up more context if there's a failure is like a really powerful notion too. I think that's a big machine experience piece for us.
This makes a lot of sense. Like the errors are part of the interface, and the more precise you can be, the more reliable the experience is going to be.
Taking it back to our SQL tools, if there's ever an error in our SQL execution, we return with the schema of the tables that were involved. Here's whatever the SQL error was. By the way, you're operating the users and purchases tables. Here's their columns and types, just so you know, in case you messed up. That's really powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's like formalizing the very first troubleshooting step that we would make in with the typical non-harmful error of just like this table doesn't exist or doesn't have the column you expected. I like that. It's just showing as much information as possible, or as it makes sense to, of course. You don't want to leak anything that you wouldn't want to, but help the user like help itself. I like that.
Nice. What else are we talking about?
What do you expect the breaking point will be? Right now, everyone is experimenting with a lot of tools and essentially trying to replace a lot of products that are very analogous, but with automation. Do you expect most things to be mostly automated with Gen AI? Do you expect, okay, take a step back. It's probably fair to expect most startup to fail at the very first attempt because this is all very new technology. But do you think that like most use cases that people are tackling are worth tackling, or are we just throwing like darts at the wall?
Over the last year, I have personally become less skeptical and more bullish on a lot of the AI stuff. And tool calling has been a big part of it. Like now that I've seen firsthand how accurate tool calling can be and how smart LLMs can be about like retrying themselves and that kind of stuff, like I'm really bullish on a lot of humans being able to augment themselves with a lot of like autonomous tasks, helping them out along the way. The coding agents are the obvious ones. Like you're still a smart engineer and you should still review the work of the agent, put it through a test suite, do a PR review. But like I can have 5 of those going under the hood at the same time and probably I can only do one at a time. So I can 5x myself. I still have to spend all the time reviewing it and checking it, but net output for me is probably going to be faster.
Yeah.
I think the same is true of other disciplines. You still want a human to review it, but you can set a bunch of things going off in the background. You turn yourself a doer to a manager, kind of.
Yeah. For me,
I think it's going to happen.
Like one of the big plus value of the tools is that it allows you to self-validate a part of the workflow in a way that the LLM cannot hallucinate. So like that way, even if it can get things wrong, you can like verify in a deterministic way that the end result is what you would expect it to be, which is very different from what we had a couple of years ago, where it was the Wild West and it's going to keep hallucinating and we were stuck with it.
Yeah, the tool boundary is perfect for that because you're like, okay, every time you make up a SQL statement at the tool boundary, I can look at it. Maybe a human in the loop has to approve every SQL statement if you wanted to. That's a great way to prove the LLM's doing the right thing.
Yep.
That would be very tedious, but you could do it.
Yeah, but it's the first step to any automation, right? Like you go in Copilot mode, verify that it behaves as expected, and then eventually you'll get tired of approving everything workflow that's fully automated.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think we will have fully autonomous. I don't know. Take it all back. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, one thing's for sure is it is very exciting.
Yeah, it is a powerful tool in our toolbox. It can't do everything, but it can do a lot.
Yep.